Today's story is about a daughter-in-law who disgraced her mother-in-law in front of her in-law's relatives. Wouldn't it be fair for a mother-in-law, who didn't experience being a daughter-in-law herself, to experience it from her daughter-in-law when she tries to make her daughter-in-law live as one? Let's take a look together. Please like and subscribe our channel.
I'm a woman who has been married for 2 years. We don't have children yet, and we're planning to have a baby next year. When we got married, I started our married life with a sense of responsibility to lead our family well with the initial passion. My husband is 5 years older than me and is a regular office worker. He's a diligent person, and under his influence, I've tried to live more diligently than before. We met through the introduction of a company senior. Both of us were single, and the senior said we would be a great match, and just asked us to meet. So we did without thinking much about it. After the first meeting, we often contacted each other and cared for each other. And we developed into a romantic relationship because we were attracted to each other's consideration. After being in a romantic relationship for about 2 years, we got married. Our parents, like my husband, and my in-laws were urging us to get married because my husband was of age. Until now, it was a bit hard because of my mother-in-law. But I guess I was very hurt while letting it go. There was a really shocking incident recently. I never dreamed that my in-laws would be such people. How can they make such unreasonable demands on me without changing their facial expressions? They spoke as if it was so natural that I thought I might have the wrong common sense. I talked to my husband, but he was just worried and couldn't provide a decent standard. I realized that married life is not just about the two of us. I naturally learned that it is important to understand each other's differences and find a consensus while establishing relationships with in-laws, and my husband with my parents. If both of us have the mind to give in first, there won't be much problem. But shouldn't we give in with something to give in? Now that I think about it, my in-laws, especially my mother-in-law, seem to have shown their true colors right after we got married. I guess I didn't know because I'm a bit dull. When I went to my in-laws' house for the first time, after getting married and returning from my honeymoon, I was surprised. Everyone else was sitting, but I was the only one walking around. It's a completely different atmosphere from my parents' house. In my family, if someone wants something, they move on their own. When my sister-in-law comes home, I'm on pins and needles. I was afraid that my sister-in-law would work, and everyone else would be playing. My mother also had the same mind as me, so it was a bit shocking for me to walk around alone at my in-laws' house. At my in-laws' house, my mother-in-law is a queen. She gave orders, and those orders always came down to me. At first, I did as my mother-in-law told me without a word. But then I got a little upset. My mother-in-law didn't ask my sister-in-law to do anything. I wanted to be like my sister-in-law, doing what I wanted to do. I complained a bit to my husband, and since then, whenever my mother-in-law asked me to do something, my husband would immediately get up and do what my mother-in-law asked me to do. I guess my mother-in-law didn't like her son getting up and moving. She always looked unhappy, and eventually, she said to me, "You should do that kind of work. Are you making your husband do it?" Did I make him do it? It was my husband who got up and did it. And if my husband does it, what's wrong with that? I didn't understand why she didn't ask her daughter. If she didn't like her son doing that, why only the daughter-in-law? Is the daughter-in-law a sinner? It was also uncomfortable to have a conversation with my mother-in-law at my in-laws' house. My mother-in-law always complained about not having enough money. When we got married, both families supported us with 50 million won each. I gave you that much money when you got married, so you should do well. Maybe she wanted to say that. My mother-in-law was saying she didn't have money. So I asked her what she could be short of. When my father-in-law wasn't a low-income person, and it was a mess. Before I knew it, I was rumored to be the daughter-in-law, who argued with my mother-in-law among my in-laws' relatives. At that time, I was really disappointed and decided on one thing. It was not that I deliberately decided, but I felt like someone made me decide naturally. Even if I do well, I will become a bad daughter-in-law, and even if I say good things, I will become a daughter-in-law who has said bad things, so let's do as I please and become a bad daughter-in-law. This is how I decided. When my mother-in-law asked me to prepare a meal, I passed it on to my husband, saying, "Honey, mother is asking you to come to the kitchen." After meals, before my mother-in-law singled me out and told me to do the dishes, I asked, "Are you going to do the dishes?" My husband thinks this is natural. He said it was natural for him to do the dishes when he went to his parents' house, saying that he couldn't even dream of doing the dishes at my parents' house because of my mother. I didn't even think about it. But when I see this, I guess my husband was more awake than me. My mother-in-law was upset that I didn't call her often until about 6 months after we got married. I was also criticized a lot for not coming to my in-laws' house often. She didn't say it directly to me, but she told my husband. I wasn't hearing it directly, but I was hearing it through my husband. But I still got a lot of stress. At first, my husband passed this word without thinking. So I once asked my husband, "How often do you call our mom?" My husband was surprised at my words, and after that, he didn't relay what my mother-in-law said. Instead, he bragged about what he did, saying, "My mother told me this on the phone today, but I told her not to say that." My husband is a bit indecisive, but I thought it was okay to this extent, because he is a husband who immediately puts into action when he thinks my rebuttal is valid. It would have been nice if my husband had cut it off from the beginning, when my mother-in-law said something weird. But I understood that he couldn't do that because of his lack of experience. So I felt comfortable. I told you there was an incident a while ago. My sister-in-law is 2 years older than my husband. My sister-in-law had 2 children before we got married, both of whom were boys. One day, she said she was pregnant with her 3rd child. I congratulated her. We're not very close, and we don't like each other inside. But we can't help but congratulate her when we hear the news of her pregnancy. My sister-in-law had a daughter. She was discharged from the hospital and stayed at a postnatal care center. And when she was discharged, my mother-in-law went to my sister-in-law's house again to help with childcare. My sister-in-law's children are elementary school students, so they don't require much care. But they are still young children, so I thought it would be difficult for my sister-in-law to handle it alone. So I thought my mother-in-law went to my sister-in-law's house every day. After a while, my mother-in-law suddenly called me and got angry. My sister-in-law gave birth to a late child, but how could I not visit once? My mother-in-law is not a working person. So she thought it was okay for my mother-in-law to go to my sister-in-law's house and help with housework on weekdays. And my sister-in-law's husband was there on weekends. But my mother-in-law said I was too much. She said I should go to my sister-in-law's house on the weekends and help with the housework. I was flustered. I was just flustered at my mother-in-law's words, accusing me as if I was thoughtless. I wondered if I lacked consideration. My job allows flexible working hours, so I can leave work early if I start early. But it's not that easy to leave work early just because you started early, right? I don't know where she heard it, but my mother-in-law was angry, saying, "You said you can leave work early, right? Then can't you come home early and help with the housework?" I was so absurd that I couldn't even respond properly to my mother-in-law, getting angry and hung up the phone. I was really dumbfounded and furious, but I had to go to my in-laws' house on the weekend. Because my aunt-in-law was coming. My mother-in-law asked me to go to my sister-in-law's house every weekend and help with the housework. Even though my aunt was there. She said, "These days, daughters-in-law don't know their place." She also said that young people these days don't know about helping each other in the family. Young people these days are selfish. In the past, they couldn't help each other, but these days, young people only know about themselves, right? My voice raised without realizing it. I guess my voice raised because I had a lot of things built up inside me so far. I asked what it was all about trying to use me as a maid at my in-laws' house. Everyone else was sitting, and didn't my mother sit and tell me to do this and that? And I asked my aunt, "Aunt, did my mother, as a daughter-in-law, have her in-laws use her like that?" My aunt said it wasn't like that at all. She said there weren't many houses that used their daughters-in-law like that even in the 1980s. Then I don't know why our mother-in-law is so impatient that she can't use me. And I don't understand why I have to go to my sister-in-law's house on the weekend and do the housework when my sister-in-law's husband is there. I did everything as my mother-in-law instructed at the beginning of the marriage. But I told her that I don't feel like doing well with my mother-in-law, who has falsely accused me. And why would I want to help my sister-in-law, who obviously dislikes me for no reason, and if you force me to do this, I will cut off visiting my in-laws' house. I told her that if she thinks I lack consideration and don't know how to share affection, she can think as she pleases. If I had received any consideration or affection, I would have tried to repay it, but all I have done is try and get scolded without receiving anything. Why should I be used like a fool? I asked her to think once whether the in-laws considered me as a family. Even if I have spare time, I have no intention of helping my sister-in-law with postpartum care at all. And if it's for my in-laws, I don't want to do anything and came home. I was a little worried about how my aunt would evaluate me, but I comforted myself that it didn't matter. I talked to my husband when I got home. I asked him to cut off such things in the middle, and my husband said he understood. I feel bad about speaking harshly to my mother-in-law while my aunt was there, but I have no regrets. I spilled words without a break, but I only thought about how much I must have had pent up, because I didn't stutter once in the middle. I plan to act more like a frog in front of my mother-in-law. There may be people who think I'm too much, but I only think like this now.
Isn't it true, as she said, that you need to have received something to give something? Would the sister-in-law, who dislikes her, be pleased if she came and interfered with the housework? She might even want to torment her out of spite, even if it's uncomfortable for her. Anyway, it seems like she spoke up very refreshingly, but what do you all think?